Hey everybody, Larry Powell here, Studio HFL. Welcome to tonight's live event with Ricky Riccardi. We're having a little bit of tech issues getting Ricky on here, getting the audio taken care of, so he'll be here in just a second. But I'm going to take this time to go ahead and say thank you for being here tonight. And I want to say thank you again to Trent Austin for a really terrific session last night. I planned about an hour and I had this whole list of questions, but of course, like most interviews, any question that I was going to ask would have been, the answers would have been worth, yeah. So, okay, so I see that Ricky is joining us. So Ricky, if you've got some headphones, that means we won't bleed back through. Oh, it keeps disappearing. Don't you love technology? So let's see if we got any comments to start here. If anybody wants to comment on anything from last night, ask any questions, and we'll see. We keep trying Ricky here. Okay, we're there. Can you see me?
I see you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, and that's much better. Excellent. Okay, terrific. Well, welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Right under the wire.
So, well, I was going to say rehearsal went perfectly, right? I mean, we met for an hour before and talked through this, and everything went beautifully. No, and this is great. If it was somebody I didn't know and I was trying to do this, I might be a little shaken, right? Trying to figure this out. But yeah, so I was looking up when I interviewed you. That was all the way back June 29th.
I mean, this time is flying. It's
Yeah.
weird because we're all in lockdown and the pandemic and everyone's staying home. But it's been the fastest year of my life. It's really strange.
Well, I mean, you've had a lot going on, obviously, and we're going to talk about that. But as I was, of course, I'll do a quick promo here. There's the first book, right? You see that without the glare. And as I was kind of just thumbing through the one you sent me just recently, your most recent book, um, I told my wife, I said, having already talked to Ricky, I'm now reading this in his voice. Which is kind of cool, right? Because you're sitting there, and if you don't have any frame of reference, right, you kind of use your own imagination. You create the voice of all the characters. You create the narrative yourself. But now I have this baseline, right? So your voice is now the baseline. So when I read that book, but that's great, right? Because I know the pacing, I know the phrasing, and and I can't put that East Coast inflection on it myself. So
Thank you. No, that's a good thing. And when I submitted my manuscript to my editor at Oxford University Press, you hold your breath. You hope it's not a total disaster or a bomb. And her first reaction, she was so pleased with it, but she said it felt like you were in a room just telling these stories. And I said, that's the goal. That's my whole style. That's where it comes from. So that's a big compliment. So thank you, Larry.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes me, you told me, of course, about all these lectures that you do, and I'm thinking, man, I'd love to be a part of those somewhere along the way. Because, well, first of all, I mean, once you get rolling, it's like you don't have to pause for notes. You don't, and of course, you'd said how many times you had done that sort of thing. But yeah, well, I would like to. I think we actually talked about that. I'm remembering now. I said, man, if I could ever get you out to Indianapolis, to do something on Louis Armstrong, that may be a possibility in the future. But so yeah, so our introduction to each other really was the interview. And
Yep.
of course, how long after that June 29th interview, how long did it take before that second book was dropped, if that's the right term?
Sure. The official publication date was September 1st, but it started showing up in the middle of August. That was that day the first box shows up unexpectedly. That's like a national holiday.
Well, and you know what's in there, right? But does it still feel like you're opening Christmas presents?
Oh yeah, no, it was just me and my 9-year-old daughter Melody. We were the only two people in the house, and I threw my phone at her. I'm like, start taking pictures, start filming, do something. This doesn't happen every day, so I
Right.
have it all documented. It's a big moment.
Yeah. Was it the same kind of feeling as that first book?
Yes, totally. Though there was a slight difference with the first book because the same daughter I just mentioned, Melody, was born the day before that book came out. So that was something else because that was like going through two births at the same time.
Wow.
I was at the hospital on May 31st and I got the call that the books were in, and then June 1st I got to see that book, over at the Pantheon offices in New York. So that was a trip. Two births
Well,
for the price of one.
and hopefully you took more pictures of your newborn daughter than you did of that first book,
I did.
right?
I did. Yes, I can vouch for
Right.
that.
Um, so I know you, of course, as I call you the Louis Armstrong expert and author. I mean, that's really the moniker that I've given you is you would be the go-to guy if somebody had a question about Louis. It's like, well, and not just because of the books, but I also want to mention that you are the curator. Is that right? Of the Louis Armstrong House.
Yeah, the official title is Director of Research Collections, which is a fancy way of saying archivist. I'm in charge of the archives.
Let's talk a little bit about that. How long you've been a part of that, and maybe how you got involved with the Louis
Sure.
Armstrong House.
Yeah, no, that's a story. I'll try not to eat up the whole time. But just to wind the clock all the way backwards, I got my master's in jazz history and research from Rutgers University, Newark, in 2005, and I graduated in May of '05. I had a 350-page master's thesis that became the foundation for my next book. I got married in June 2005, and I said, "Look out, world, here I come." And I said, well, the only job I've ever had, my summer job was always helping my father out. He was a painting contractor in Toms River, New Jersey. So I said, I'll help the old man out. I'll paint some houses. And long story short, I was a full-time house painter with a master's degree for 4 years. But it was during those 4 years that I started my Armstrong blog. I started doing small lectures, and I started visiting the Louis Armstrong archives just as a researcher. I knew I wanted to write this book, and the blog was getting me a reputation. But the very first time I went to the Armstrong archives, I met the founding director, Michael Cogswell. And actually, I went there with my wife the first time. And when I walked out, I said, I need to work there. Whatever happens, I need to end up there. And so 4 years go by, 2009, I'm still painting houses, but now I have a book deal. It was a weird time, a really weird time. Um, but Michael Cogswell, he contacted me and said, listen, we just got a 2-year grant to hire an archivist to process the Jack Bradley collection. Now, the Jack Bradley collection is the world's largest private collection for all things Armstrong. And I knew Jack. I'd interviewed him for the book. And so
Mhm.
I filled out my application. My first reference was Jack Bradley, which was shrewd. And so they called me in for the interview. Great. And so the first half of the interview were all jazz questions or Armstrong questions. They knew me. I said, well, this is a cakewalk. But to be an archivist, you should actually have archival training, which I did not. I had a bachelor's in journalism, like I said, a master's in jazz history. So the second half of the interview were all archives related questions. I'll never forget, what are the pitfalls of retrospective conversion? And I went into my Ralph Cramden, hominy. it was looking bleak. And so I came home and I told my wife, I said, I don't know, that it was going well, then I lost it. But they called me in for the in-person interview and they took me into the stacks and they said, here is the unprocessed Jack Bradley collection. Jack was Louis's personal photographer the last 12 years of his life. You'll be working with negatives and contact sheets like this. And Michael reached into a box and pulled out a contact sheet and held it up. And like a robot, I looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a Mercury recording session from the mid '60s." And he's like, how do you know? And I said, well, there's Big Chief Moore on trombone, there's Eddie Shue on clarinet. That version of the All Stars was only together for 6 months. In that 6 months, they had 2 recording sessions for Mercury in September and November. It's got to be one of those dates because they're clearly in a recording studio. And about 2 hours later, they called me and said, I got the job. So it's been 12 and a half years about. And I can't envision. I don't think I'm qualified to do anything else. So it's a it's a match made in
Wow.
heaven.
You're going through that story, and I'm thinking it's like maybe the correct title is an Armstrong savant, right?
Well, I always give Michael the credit because Michael would always say that, he could have hired somebody with, heavy duty library chops and taught them the basics of Armstrong. But, he said, you know what, let's get the Armstrong expert in there and teach him the basics of cataloging. And I've been fortunate that I've worked, we've been able to hire trained archivists and archival assistants. And I've worked with great people over the years have kind of propped me up when my skill set runs a little dry. But in terms of identifying photos and answering reference questions and all that stuff, it's a dream every day.
Would you share? And I think this was a cool thing to experience. You telling this was when people visit this Armstrong house, the reactions that you witness. Could you share one of those?
Sure. I mean, one of the most common reactions, it almost sounds over dramatic, but we've all seen everybody's work there, tears. People make that pilgrimage, especially international visitors. It's a real big tourist destination. People who land at LaGuardia Airport get in a cab, and the first stop is the Louis Armstrong House Museum. And they're coming from Australia, they're coming from England, they're coming from Japan. And to see people walk through that door and put down their luggage and either start weeping because they hear the music. And sometimes it takes a little while. Sometimes people will come, they might be Armstrong fans. Oh, this is cute, it's his house. But we get them eventually because when you take the tour, everything is 100% original. No one has lived there since Louis and Lucille Armstrong passed away. But on top of that, we play audio. We have audio from Louis Armstrong's private tapes. And, we don't really build up to it. It's like the docent will be telling you a story, and then he reaches over and pushes a button, and you hear Louis Armstrong's voice coming out of the speakers in the room you're standing in. And that's when people, they really feel it. And so, we're very proud of the program there. We've been closed since obviously the middle of March, but we have big plans for the end of this year and the future. So we hope to always be the #1 destination for Armstrong nuts everywhere.
Well, I'm going to have to make my pilgrimage, as it were, when the time comes, and well, not just this collection that you're talking about, but and being able to visit the rooms in the house, but you're also talking instruments that are available to see, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, we have 7 trumpets overall. One is on display at the house, and that was a Selmer given to Louis by King George V of England in 1934. And then we have a Selmer on display at the archives, which is, I think it's his favorite one because we contacted Selmer and it was definitely manufactured November 52. Louis was in Paris November 52, but it is the horn he's holding in all those iconic shots of him on the front steps of his home with all the neighborhood Queen's children surrounding him, which was taken 18 years later. So we think that was probably his go-to. But we have 5 others, and we don't advertise this, but here I am talking about it on social media. But trumpet players of a certain professionalism, we could say, we invite them to come to the archives. We invite them to bring their mouthpiece, and we like to keep the horns percolating, as Louis would say. And again, just like the house, I've seen adults just break into tears just holding the trumpets. It's an emotional experience. It's emotional for me. I've been doing it for 12 years now, just getting that combination to the safe and knowing that I'm the one who has to open it. That's a part of the job I'll never take for granted.
So is the combination to that safe, does it have anything to do with his birthday? Or, I mean, are you his social security number? I mean, you don't have to give it away right there. But
I got to keep some secrets.
I think about, thank goodness for people like you who take the time and the care to do what you do, because there's so many things, I mean, so many, well, every job is important, right? I mean, truly, but we need all these jobs. We need people who are going to do what you do, because otherwise it's going to get lost in a basement or an attic or If it's any kind of a certain film, right, doesn't it disintegrate over time? I mean,
Sure.
people that are being able to take and care for and make sure that this stuff lives on.
Yeah, now the fact that we're here today, I mean, this is not my baby. I always call myself just the delivery boy. I'm one step in the chain, but you could not have planned it any better because Louis and Lucille Armstrong, they didn't have children. So that's part one. Because I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but you hear stories of once the children, selling instruments, selling stuff, not knowing what it is. Louis passed away. Lucille saved everything. Lucille passed away, and the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation, that's the Armstrong estate, they made sure everything was taken care of. So Lucille left the home to the city of New York. The city of New York said someone needs to oversee this, and they chose Queens College because Queens College had an incredible jazz program at the time. It was Jimmy Heath and Sir Roland Hanna, Donald Byrd. They were nearby, and they had a beautiful new library that had a whole suite that was just waiting for this. So that's like fortunate sign number one. The archives will be taken care of. Fortunate sign number two, they hired Michael Cogswell, who passed away in April of 2020. We're still kind of dealing with it because so much of what we do, so much of what I do was Michael's vision. He was hired in 91. He had the archives open in 94. They made him director of the house. He had the house open in 2003. And then his vision was to open up like a cultural center across the street from the house. And Michael, unfortunately, passed before completion. Construction is ongoing right now. We're hoping by the end of summer, early fall, the Louis Armstrong Center will be open to the public. It's going to be right across the street from the house. And the archives will still be part of the Queens College family, but all of that will be packed up, will be moved to the new building, will occupy the whole second floor. The first floor will have a permanent exhibit curated by Jason Moran. There's going to be a 70-seat jazz room with concerts and lectures and film screenings and all that kind of stuff. And so that's happening. And then in 2016, we got a call from Robert F. Smith, the world's wealthiest African American, and he was a huge Armstrong fan, and he gave us a $2.7 million grant to digitize the entire collection. And so every scrapbook page, every photograph, every big band arrangement, all of it digitized, which is just, I can't even explain what that means. And so you take any part out of that equation, and I'm not here right now, and I'm not talking about this robust program, but the whole relationship with the Armstrong Foundation, with Queens College, with our board, with our staff, getting the archives open, the house open, now the center open. It's really unbelievable, and there's nothing else like it, in the jazz world. There's a few historic houses that are trying to get together. There's a couple of incredible archives, obviously, but we have the world's largest archives for a single jazz musician, and the bulk of it was compiled and curated by Louis Armstrong himself. So you could hear me talking about it. I'm still in wonder that it even happened this way, and to just be one in this long line. There's so many folks: Michael, Stanley Crouch, Oscar Cohen, Phoebe Jacobs. People from the college have all come and gone, passed away, left their mark. And now it's up to us. We're still telling the story and getting things done, even in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, again, I can't wait to visit the house, and hopefully be able to visit you, while I'm there.
Of course.
Let's switch over to the books for a second, and it's kind of like, well, I want to start at the beginning, but you wrote these out of order, so we can't go chronologically because your first book. Well, let's start with that. I mean, you started with the late years.
Correct. Yeah. Those were the years that changed my life. So when I was 15, I was born in 1980. So I turned 15 in September 1995, and I was already interested in old stuff. I was listening to, ragtime music and, old vaudeville routines and watching black and white movies. I was just like stuck in the past. And so I saw the Glenn Miller story, the old Jimmy Stewart movie, and Lewis comes out and does Basin Street Blues. I'm like, okay, I need to know more about this guy. And I went to the library, I checked out a cassette compilation, and it was all the 1950s Columbia recordings, all the stuff produced by George Avakian. Lewis plays Handy, Satch plays Fats, Ambassador Satch. And that cassette just changed everything. Nothing had ever moved me that much. And I said, all right, I now need to listen to everything, hear everything, and learn everything there is to know about this guy. And that's just how my brain was always wired. Anything I got into, before that, it was Laurel and Hardy, and it was Muhammad Ali, and it was, what something would come on my radar. I started watching the Looney Tunes when I was like 6 or 7. Next thing you know, I'm learning, who the directors were, the writers. Trek Brown did the sound effects, Mel Blanc and Carl Stalling. It's like it was just how I'm wired. So I figured, all right, Armstrong's going to be the next guy on the list. What I didn't expect was almost every book that I took out had the same narrative, that this is a genius up until 1928. And then after 1928, he goes commercial. He's a sellout. Someone as far as saying he was an Uncle Tom, and he coasted. He played the same solos every night, and he was mugging and grinning and just kind of embarrassing himself. And we'll always remember young Louis Armstrong, but we'll always treat this kind of as a cautionary tale. And I would read this and wince and say, what's going on here? And eventually I read, Stanley Crouch and Dan Morgenstern and Gary Giddens and other writers. And I saw that, I wasn't alone in loving later Lewis, but it just wasn't there in book form. So when I went to Rutgers and got that master's degree, they said, you need to write a thesis. And I said, Louis Armstrong's later years. And my mentor was the great historian, Lewis Porter, who's written the definitive books on Lester Young and John Coltrane. And I could see in his face, he was like, no one has really done anything on later Lewis. And so at college, I threw myself into it. Rutgers Newark was on the same campus as the Institute of Jazz Studies. Dan Morgenstern was still the director there. And then I interviewed Jack Bradley and George Avakian. There were 5 surviving All-Stars. I interviewed all of them. And I wanted to tell that story and and once I started going to the Armstrong archives, listening to these reel-to-reel tapes, hearing Armstrong angry, hearing him proud, hearing him boasting, hearing him telling jokes, I started listening to all those tapes, and I felt like I started to know him better than some family members, because it's all there. It is just out there. He kept that recorder on, didn't erase anything. And so that was the whole goal for the first book, is I wanted folks to understand that this is an incredible story, just as is. Here's this guy that everybody was writing off, and he's knocking the Beatles off the charts, and he just one hit after another. People thinking that he kind of was creatively spent in the 20s, but then you listen to Lewis Plays Handy and Satch Plays Fats and the musical autobiography. They think he's taking it easy, but you hear him challenging himself with Oscar Peterson and Dave Brubeck and Duke Ellington, and with strings and orchestras and Oliver Nelson arrangements, and never taking it easy for a minute. And of course, the race angle, the Uncle Tom stuff. I wanted to get into Little Rock. I wanted to get into his private feelings, how he dealt with segregation, how he refused to go back home to New Orleans, what he said after Bloody Sunday. And so the book came out in 2011, and like I said, I don't take full credit. I put it in book form. I'm very proud of that, but I'm one in a long line of later Armstrong lovers. But I do feel that it's the old feelings and myths and kind of just everybody's taking those years for granted started to shift a little bit. And in the last decade, there's been a slew of reissues and unissued projects and box sets and digital releases, all from that last 25-year period. And so I feel like Armstrong's post 1947 work is actually more respected. I meet young musicians all the time now, and the All-Stars is actually their point of reference. They love the Hot Fives. They know how important that is. They love West End blues and everything. But the amount of musicians who've come up to me and talked about Ambassador Satch and Lewis Plays Handy, like today's Trummy Young's birthday, and there's musicians on social media younger than me posting about Lewis Plays WC Handy and Ambassador Satch. Listen to Trummy Young and Trummy and Lewis. And so I felt like, that was what I set out to do. I did it. There's been this kind of reevaluation. I thought my work was done. It's obviously not.
Well, how was the reception to that book?
It was beyond my expectations, because I knew, it's funny, because my personality is so, I don't know how to describe it. I'm non-confrontational, for one thing. I try to see the best in everybody. I try to be respectful, and I try to stay out of controversy. But when I write these things, I kind of take these stances that just like, like, no, these critics were wrong and these musicians were wrong and these listeners were wrong, and if you felt this way, you're wrong. I did something at a lecture about 5 years ago. I improvised it and it got such a big laugh. I threatened to fight the audience, fight anyone in the audience if they disagreed with me by the end of the lecture, and it got a huge laugh, and it was doubly funny because I don't think I've ever been in a fist fight in my life, but I kept it in the act, you could say, for a few years because it was just so ridiculous. But then I would ask at the end of the lectures, I'm like, so who am I fighting now? You've spent an hour and a half with me and listening to Louis Armstrong, and no one's taken me up on it yet.
Well, but there are always naysayers, right? There's always going to be a critic or more. And I know, especially after paying attention to the release of this latest book, and you've had a very interesting perspective on those. It's almost like you embrace those critics. Yeah, and I love the social media interplay and your comments. Here's what so and so said in this review and in this review, but you kind of just, you know, I don't know
Yeah,
how you would do it otherwise. You couldn't survive if you just let it get to you, right?
I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound like it's religion. I also don't want to sound egotistical. So I have to watch my words. But I have lived with this now, and I've listened to every one of those reel-to-reel tapes, and I've been responsible for a lot of those reissues. I've heard all the session tapes. I've heard him playing with no chops. I've heard him rehearsing. I've heard the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I feel like, I'm so confident in my knowledge, you could say, of Armstrong that you could have opinions. Opinions are fine. You could say that I get what you're coming from with the 1950s, but I still prefer the 20s. That's great. I'm not going to fight you on that. That's your opinion. But there are still folks who just insist on carrying over some of those things. He played the same solo every night. Well, then, I'll get out my blog and I'll play you 15 versions of the same song with different solos. And it's like, well, answer that, or, oh, he was, the African Americans, left him in 1929 as his black audience. And then the new book, I dug into the black press, and it's just like, how do you respond? I've done the research. And so it's not that I'm looking for fights, but I feel like I said, you can still have your favorites and dismiss some stuff, okay, but once they start hurling the same brickbats that have been hurled at them for 70 years, I'm ready to debate. I'm ready to fight back.
Well, and it's
Using
not just that.
Using his words and his music. That's the key.
Well, and it's not just tapes and recordings and any kind of documentation or other books, right? I mean, you actually went out and were able to talk to people that worked with him, people that knew him, intimately, in the sense that they were there for a lot of this stuff. I mean, so when you go to the horse's mouth, right? It's like, well, they told me that. So how do you
Yeah,
argue with that?
I mean that's the cornerstone of everything I do. Because if you go back and read my Rutgers thesis, it's boring as hell, I can tell you that, because I was just so happy to be finding research and reviews. I just put it all out there, and there wasn't much connecting it. But I had these feelings. It was Ricky Riccardi's feelings that Louis Armstrong was still great in the 50s, and he was tough on race, and he was this, and he was that. And then the very first time I went to the Louis Armstrong archives, which, no joke, Facebook reminded me, was 15 years ago today. I swear to God, January 12th,
Happy
2006.
anniversary.
I can't, that was just, going as a spectator. And I went to the archives. I remember I got there at 4 o'clock. They closed at 5. They said, your time is limited. I said, I got to hear one of these tapes. I've heard so much about these tapes. And they're like, all right, well, here's our, the catalog. And they brought us fat binder. And, I'm trying to read the descriptions. I got as far as 14. I said, yeah, bring me tape 14. That sounds good. And it was a tape of Louis in 1956. And I can't tell you how much I ended up quoting that tape in the book, because it was all there. Louis saying that version of the All-Stars was the best one he ever had. He was playing better than ever. He didn't care about styles. He didn't want to be pigeonholed. And once I heard that, and then once I started talking to the musicians, it was very easy to tune out the writers. And, when I wrote that first book, I was still kind of combating the other biographers. Like, I would quote James Lincoln Collier, I would quote Gunther Schuller, and I would say, this is what they wrote. They're wrong. And so when I wrote the new book, Heart Full of Rhythm, I didn't consult any of the biographies. I wanted to be just contemporary research. I wanted to be just the musicians who were there, just the writers who were there, just Armstrong who was there. I didn't want to get any, other perspectives or different readings or interpretations. Like, let's go to the source. These folks lived it. They have not, like when I interviewed Danny Barcelona, the drummer, I don't think anyone had really sat down with him. I got like a 2.5 hour oral history, and he was with Armstrong for 12 years. And it's like, how didn't, nobody contact that guy? So that's what I fall back on. And as often as I can, using his own words, Armstrong's own words, because anybody's read both the books, it's not hagiography. There he is cheating on wives, and there he is, singing Sleepy Time. I'm happy to criticize him, but I always try to also include his perspective. So even when he does something that makes the reader disagree or is uncomfortable, at least you'll know where he's coming from. It's not just, berating him for the sake of berating him, or he disappointed my expectations. Now let's see where he was coming from. What was he thinking of in 1936 to make this choice? And then we can debate it afterward. You can still feel uncomfortable, but at least you know where he stands. That's my goal.
So if you could talk to somebody who knew him now, what kind of question would you ask? And maybe I'm going to invite somebody into the show right now. And let's see. Hi, Doc.
Oh my God.
How are you? Hey, Ricky, surprise.
So, this is a surprise. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's that book that Doc is holding, Ricky. That's the one you autographed for him, and I thought, man, we got to have somebody on who was there, right? Because
Yes.
you never got to meet Armstrong,
Right there.
Man.
There you go. So, I mean, Doc? You know what I remember talking to you. You told me you classified Louis Armstrong as maybe the most influential musician of the 20th century. Do you remember telling me that? Hang on.
I believed it then, and I believe it now. And it would be very easy to have that go another way, because as time passes, a lot of things change you have no control over. And but Louis was Louis. I mean, big is big, and Louis is Louis.
So, I kind of want to, Doc, if you've got questions for Ricky, or Ricky, if you've got questions for Doc, maybe about his perspective on the book, I can just kind of step over in the corner and sip on some punch for a couple of minutes. But Doc, maybe what's your feedback on Ricky's book that you've got there?
Well, I was very conscious when I first got the book and was reading it, that I wanted to have a take on it. And it, first of all, it just as a book. It's beautifully written. The rhythm is there. The truth is there. It's really a terrific book, even if it's about, I don't care who the book is about, but it's about the most famous jazz musician of all time. And I don't care, other people might have a different opinion about that than I have, but they're not trumpet players.
Well put. Well put.
Uh,
Ricky, you got a response to that?
I don't believe any of this is happening right now. This is one of the great moments. Thank you, Doc.
This is even if I didn't like trumpet and didn't like Louis Armstrong, I would enjoy this book because it's so beautifully done.
Thank you.
You created something very special here.
Doc, I remember
Oh.
you telling me that as you were reading it, names would pop up and you would remember either, and I'm not talking about just Joe Glazer, right, who is a manager that both you and Louis shared, but there were other names, musicians that you worked with through the years. And so this book was it was a great reminiscence for you too. Is that right?
That is true. Yeah. A lot of the guys that I work with in New York and jazz dates and different things we did, they traveled to Africa with Louis, and they told me all these great stories. But Louis is, I don't know, he is the seminal #1 jazz person of the whole. And I've often told guys in front, I got up in front of a band and we're going to do a concert someplace, like with the Tonight Show band. And I say, guys, just remember one thing. Louis is going out there with us, because if it weren't for Louis, we wouldn't be doing this concert. And if it weren't for Louis, I'm not sure there would have been, there might have been jazz music, but it wouldn't have been the same. He was a powerful human being, Louis was. And, he had such a great sense of humor and just a beautiful guy. He's somebody you just like to sit down and talk to. But without Louis Armstrong, there never would have been something called jazz concerts. And I'm not sure there would have been jazz recordings either.
Well, Ricky, now, when you say that the way you responded that first time you heard a Louis Armstrong recording, so, I mean, that was just, that was verified, right? Those feelings. I mean, he was that powerful of a musician, right?
Well,
to be able to capture people like that.
The question I always ask people who were there, because I was born too late. So my question for you, Doc, is how would you describe his sound in person?
Louis had his own sound, and it wasn't something that he said, well, if I do this little touch and every time I do that lick, then they'll know it's me. No, Louis is jazz. He is jazz. And of course, that, you say the same in some ways about a lot of people on other instruments, or like Duke Ellington, Duke was Duke. But Louis, I'll never forget and then this is talked about so much that I hate to mention it again, but when Louis did that recording in 1925, beep, 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 beep. I mean, he said that first of all, that cadenza, and then everything he did after that, that was the foundation of jazz. Not to say that some of the original stuff that came out of, just guys playing on a street corner in New Orleans. Yeah, that happened. And it would have happened, but it wouldn't have had the effect. He was the preacher.
Yeah.
He was the father of jazz, and he could talk about it. He could do it. He could sing it. He could play it. And a lot of times I stood up in front of a big band going out to do a jazz concert, if you want to call it that. But I'd say, well, guys, just remember one thing. If Lou hadn't gotten out here and started all this, there would be no such thing as jazz, and we wouldn't be doing a jazz concert. And then I've said that to a lot of audiences before playing one of his tunes.
Well, Doc, obviously he influenced you tremendously, but everything that you have just said about Louis Armstrong has been said about you and will be said about you. Right. And Ricky asks, about what was his sound, and you said it was Louis. And I mean, how many people say, what does Doc sound like? Well, Doc sounds like Doc. I mean, it's like when you put on a recording of Louis Armstrong, there is no doubt. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you if it was the 20s. I'm not as schooled in this. I couldn't tell you if it was the 20s or the 60s. I could probably take a pretty good guess basically on the style, but I would be able to tell you, oh, that's Louis Armstrong. That's unmistakable.
Oh yeah. And I know this has been discussed so many times, and about West End Blues, which he recorded in 1925. With that well, I don't know what word you use. It was genius, but that recording and that cadenza on the front of that thing, and just the way he played the melodies afterward, that was what caused jazz to be. That's what I think. And it's not that, I'm a trumpet player and I loved Louis and I admired him and all of that. Sure. But the truth is the truth. And when you wrote this book, man, you wrote the truth. I thought when I got the book, I said, "Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's a great picture of Louis." Yeah. And I opened it, and 2 days later, I said, I gotta finish this book, or I'll never live the rest of my life. I hope
I'm so glad
you can take it in what you did here, because there have been a lot of archival kinds of books written about Louis, but you captured everything, his childhood, the whole kit and caboodle, and how he grew up, and things that happened. And you realize as you're reading along, wow, if there hadn't been, if Louis didn't get out there and do what he did, jazz may not have come into existence. It would, but it sure wouldn't be the same. He was the king. He was the guy that says, "Okay, I'm going to show you this one more time, and you better get it right."
Doc, I I can't thank you enough for being willing to come on. And while you're here, though, I want to say congratulations on your documentary that just came out.
Yes.
If people haven't seen that yet,
Yes.
you've got to seek it out. And I know right now it's doing like an independent film circuit around the States, maybe around the world, but hopefully it's going to be where everybody can get an opportunity at some point to check that out. It's not even a monetary thing. It's worth your time to sit and soak it in. So thanks for making that happen. I know you gave Nancy, your daughter, a big amount of credit for getting that to happen.
Nancy and the guy, that
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Wright, they made that happen. And when Nancy called me up and told me about it, I said, "Well, I have to pay attention on this one."
Well, it was terrific, and again, thanks for coming in tonight. It's a treat to see you. You look great. Like I told Kathy yesterday, I said you're 93 years young. You are truly the definition of the youngest 93-year-old I've ever met. So
I wish you'd be around in the morning when you can say that to me. Hey, Doc, you're something.
Yeah. So, well, Doc, thank you. If it's okay, I'm gonna wrap up here with
well, wait a minute,
with Ricky. Oh no, all right. You know what?
No, stick around.
Stick around. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to get a different perspective on here. So, let's see. We'll play her. There we go. Now everybody's kind of got an equal viewing. Does that look different to you guys? Different layout?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I like that. So, Ricky, back to you. And I apologize if this was too much of a surprise for you tonight, but I thought you might appreciate.
No, this was a dream come true. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Doc. Listen, my God, I can't wait to show this to my kids.
when I got this book, and I swear, I knew the minute I opened it up and started reading, I said, I ain't doing anything till I'm through with this book. And then I may go back and check it out a second time. And that Louis and I had the same manager, Joe
Glazer.
Yeah. And so because I was just a guy trying to get started, and to have the same manager that Louis had, it gave me chances to if I'd do a concert in New York and in a club or something, Louis would be in the audience, as a favor, first of all, to Joe Glazer. And secondly, he and I got along great. And I swear to God, if Louis hadn't come along, there may never have been a thing called American jazz music. What do you think, Ricky?
I agree. And to do it equally with the trumpet and the voice, that's what always fractures me. I mean, the way he plays the trumpet influences trumpet players, piano players, saxophonists, guitarists, anybody, drummers. But then he sings, and all of a sudden, here comes Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. And for one guy to do all of that, it's overwhelming. I still think we're still not fully aware of that impact, but we're getting there.
Well, your book is very good on that. And I'm just going to say, if anybody thinks I'm just doing a commercial for your book, they're wrong. I literally could not stop till I read the whole book, and it supported so many things that I felt about Louis. I mean, because you're not just talking about Louis, the jazz trumpeter, and who had this wild sounding voice and all of those wonderful things. But you read this and you say, what would have happened if Louis Armstrong hadn't come along when he did and did the things that he did? Who who knows what we'd be doing to entertain ourselves? Uh, and just to show you what a profound influence he was. I was doing an album and I wanted to have Sleep Time Down South in there. And so it was with the band, and they, whoever wrote the arrangement wrote it nicely. And the minute there's an intro and then a ba, 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 I lost control of the horn. I could no more play a Louis Armstrong piece without, his spirit coming through and being in every note that I played. Not that I played it as good as he did, but he just got right inside of you. And I to this day, I can't play any one of his tunes that made him famous. And then I come along and play the tune, and I find myself saying to myself, "Hey, self, get a look at this. You're playing like you're doing an imitation of Louis Armstrong." And I didn't mean it that way, but I mean, for any trumpet player to play ba 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 ba, boo 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 doo, what, yeah. I mean, you have to do it. It's he owns every piece. I found my friend Bob on Blueberry Hill. Yes, Lord.
Doc, when you were around Louis, and did you ever get a sense, and you can think about it in terms of stardom these days, was he a superstar in the public eye, or was that something that you think came along later? And Ricky, I'm sure you could speak to that too, but did he have that superstar status when you met him and started associating with him?
You asking that to me?
Yes, Doc.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It isn't that he was an inspiration to other trumpet players or anything. It's he took over the world of jazz, and I think that we were at a turning point when Louis came along, where if Louis came along and started playing his style and his being who he was, and it went like that. Otherwise, it could have gone like that, and I don't know what jazz would have been, but I don't think it would have been. It wouldn't have been the same, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what was wonderful about him is that he is you forgot immediately about his trumpet playing or his singing. When you met Louis, that oh boy, what an inspiration he was, and what a lovely human being. God, just one of the all-time greats. And people reach that kind of stature. Every now and then you're going to ask, Louis Armstrong or this guy or that guy. Yeah, no, not with Louis. He did everything to create the big band sound and the small group sounds, and to know him was a thrill.
Doc, do you have a favorite era of Louis Armstrong? Are you a fan of the 20s or later?
No, not really. I like everything he played.
Oh, okay. So everything. You're going to take the easy way out and say, I liked all of it.
Oh, and don't forget his vocalizing, because when he played the trumpet, it was his voice was coming through. It was his when he took song and played it, he then owned it. And God, if you were a trumpet player and you wanted to play, I found my thrill, you couldn't say, I found my thrill. I found my thrill. Yes. That he didn't, his song didn't come over you, it came into you. And then to me, it's impossible to play anything on a trumpet that Louis has played first. Play it like Louis played it.
Ricky, in your writing both of these books and all this other research, do you find, can you think of corroborative things? I mean, Doc's talking about this. Do you think, oh yeah, I remember so-and-so telling me that, or witnessing this or that? Is this bringing anything together?
Oh, totally. I mean, the one thing, I've interviewed now, I don't know, 9 or 10, including Doc, you can say. I've been in the same room, I don't know, 10, 15, I don't know. Whenever I meet people who spent a minute with Louis Armstrong or were in his band, I just want to soak it all in. And Terry Teachout is a friend, and he wrote a great book on Armstrong called Pop. So we once compared notes. Everybody I've talked to and everybody he talked to, if they met Louis Armstrong, they didn't have a negative word to say about him. And that is so rare, because usually you could find somebody who was like, well, what you see is not what you get. And off stage, he was kind of sour, and he cheated me out of money, or it's not possible. And I'm not saying he was a saint, but he's close.
Well, he's human, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Well, I think about
there's things I'd love to tell you about Louis that I can't tell you. Well, I can't go into the story, I'm sorry, but
well, we'll have to make an arrangement for another session. Or a closed session. Yeah.
Well, if I were a trumpet player and a worshiper of Louis Armstrong, I still would have enjoyed the book. You're a hell of a good writer.
Thank you.
You had Louis' beat. You had his tempos on everything.
Thank you. Well, needless to say, if you're ever back in New York when this whole thing is over, we have his trumpets are ready for you. His mouthpieces are ready for you. We have his whole big band book. If you need an arrangement, if you want to see the house again, we have photos. We have photos of you with Louis at the Tonight Show. Louis going to see your band in 1970, I think at the Rainbow Room, I want to say. We've
Yes.
got it all. So let's.
Well, we had the same manager, Joe
Right.
Kaiser. And as busy as Louis was and as unimportant as I was, he would still come. You know, I know Louis, Joe would probably put a bug in his ear. Hey, the kid is playing at the so and so. What do you think? Let's go by and see him. Oh, there are stories I'd love to tell you right now.
Well, I've got to keep this at least PG-13.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Could I just tell us one story, and then us three will, and Kathy will have it, and then you can cut it out of the thing.
Well, we're live, so how about this? How about I give a
Tell it.
how about I give a warning to any listeners out there if you want something. Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, what a great teaser! Holy cow! I mean, that's a cliffhanger if I've ever heard a cliffhanger, right? People are gonna have to find a way to come back and find out what was he gonna tell. So
Louis came to see me. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but he came to see me playing at a place in New York. I forgot where it was. One of the really good places to play, and I had a sore on my lip. And Louis, hey, Pops, what's happening, baby? Come on over here. And I said, "Oh, Louis Christ, I got to play tonight. And look what I got. Oh, shit, man, there was nothing about that." And then he had a cure for it.
no.
That cannot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So after we're done here, we'll have to stay on and
No.
finish that. Doc, I've heard the story, so I know we're going to have to stop right there. So let me ask you this.
You know where I'm going with that.
Yes, I absolutely know where you're headed with that. Ricky, I want to ask you. You've covered a significant portion of Louis's musical career. Do you have the energy, the drive to do a third or fourth or fifth book and keep going back into the beginning of that career?
I don't have anything official to announce, but I'm happy to say I am working on book 3 right now. Oxford University Press, the publisher of Heartful of Rhythm, they've been wonderful to work with, and they're very happy with it. And so they reached out to me, and they asked me the same question. So I submitted a proposal on December 1st, and any free time I've had in the last month, I've already started getting sources together and stuff. But the third book would cover his birth, 1901, right up until 1928. And then that will complete the trilogy, and then I can move on. It's a funny thing because, these are the years that everybody agrees are, perfection, West End blues and everything else. And so because of that, I've never been that excited to write about him because I figured, well, everybody knows that's great. I want to shine the light on the big bands, shine the light on the all-stars. But in recent years, some different sources have turned up, an interview with Louis's sister, Mama Lucy, and, Lil Hardin's autobiographical manuscript. The first few chapters surfaced 2 years ago. There's Lewis's manuscript for his autobiography, and plus I've heard all the tapes and scrapbooks and all that stuff. So I know there's enough fresh material, and I have my own, perspective and my own way of connecting things that now I know, it feels unfinished, and I feel like certain things that I hinted at in the first book I wrote won't make sense until this book comes out. And the main goal is just to show that there's a tremendous consistency in Armstrong's life, in his work, in his art, his values. He didn't get hung up on styles and this kind of thing. He was always himself, no matter the settings. And what he was doing in those early years, playing pop songs and listening to Guy Lombardo and, all that kind of stuff, it is reflected back in the work that he does in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's all the same guy, at every point in his career. He's the same guy. So a long-winded answer of saying it's going to happen. So stay tuned for the official announcement, and I just have to research it and write it. But we'll meet again in about 3 years, and I'll be good to go.
Well, you certainly don't lack the passion for your subject. I mean, and Doc is right. And like I told you at the beginning, it's not just that when I read it, it's an easy read. I hear your voice when I read it, and that really does lend a great deal to the pacing of reading the book. But yeah, very well written, and congratulations on 2 really fine books. It makes me curious to see, were your blogs that you referred to earlier, were they as good as this?
Well, there's over 600 of them going back to 2007. And they're a lot more informal, and like I did one about, I remember Lewis and Sidney Bechet locking horns on cakewalking babies from home, and I framed the whole thing out like a boxing match, and so they're a lot of fun, I think. But those are the places you can go where I take like one Armstrong solo, like Back Home Again in Indiana or Strutting with Some Barbecue, and I analyze every surviving version, so you can see, when he changes the solos, how he approaches them when his chops are down, big band versions, small group versions. So there's a lot to unpack there. As I used to knock out about 50, 60 entries a year, and now it's down to like, I don't know, if I can get 10 or 15 out, I'm doing all right. But they're all there. The dippermouth.blogspot.com. That's the website. The Wonderful World of Louis Armstrong. And like I said, 600 entries going back 14 years. So there's plenty of ground to cover.
That's terrific. And thank you for mentioning that website. And I'll have to make sure to get that from you again. I'll include that, when I put this out on the YouTube channel. By the way, this will come out tomorrow. The video will go up on the Studio HFL YouTube channel. The audio will go on SoundCloud, and it'll be out on the podcast platforms. So hang on one second. I'm just going to do a little commercial for the rest of the week here. So if you guys out there are listening, thanks for being here tonight. And I know there are people out there, but tomorrow night, Peter Pickett and Eric Murine from Pickett Blackburn. Whiff Rudd is Thursday night. He's going to be talking about his new book, Side by Side. Carl Hammond of Hammond Design, the mouthpiece genius that he is going to be here Friday night. And then David Messina and Erica Howard of Messina Covers, which is going to be a really great conversation, an insight into a part of our industry we don't really maybe know a whole lot about. So I hope everybody will show up for those. But again, all of this is going to be available again on all the social media. So Doc, don't go anywhere. All right. I'm gonna wrap things up. Ricky, don't go anywhere. We're gonna stay on for a little bit, but I want to again tell everybody thank you for coming tonight. Thanks for supporting this, and I hope you enjoyed it. David Wolf, one of my students, one of my former students, is now a good friend. Not that those have to be exclusive, right? David posted in the notes dippermouth.blogspot.com. Thank you, David, for doing that. Appreciate that. And by the way, Brenda Clark, Doc, you remember Brenda here in Indianapolis? She's been watching. So Brenda, thank you for being here. I appreciate that. And Jenny's been watching too. Hey, you remember my wife, the one who made you? What kind of pie did she make for you that you just?
Pumpkin.
Pumpkin pie.
Yeah, and my dear friend there with the Dodge Charger.
Oh yeah, Brenda. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if she's driving it all that fast these days, but well, again, thanks everybody for being here. Hopefully I'll see everybody tomorrow night. And for right now, on behalf of Studio.
Can I just do one more commercial about this?
Absolutely. I'm not going to cut you off, Doc. Keep going.
Well, no, it's like this. If you want to know what Louis was really like as a person, not as a trumpet player, but as a person, this book is it lets you get a look into him as a human being. And it isn't all just, well, if you're a trumpet player, you'll enjoy the book. No, it's just, and it does a lot to shine a good light on the relationship between races in this. If you know Louis, you like his book, and you read it, it may change your life if you haven't opened yourself up to it before. And oh man, I don't know. It's just I just sat down and started reading the book all over again today. I could read this book 5 times a year. I swear to God, I really could.
Ricky, there's your endorsement of the year right there.
Tell me about
it. You about one other thing here. There was a guy in Portland, Oregon, where I got my first professional go around, named Monty Ballou.
Oh, sure.
Who was a banjo player and also a guitar player, and just a hell of a character. And he was really a great friend of Louis. When Louis would come to Portland, it wasn't always too easy to find a place to play where he was going to be welcomed and feel good, you know. And so he always stayed with Monty Ballou. And Monty Ballou and I were in a big band playing at the Paramount Theater in Portland. And Monty said, "Hey, man, I want you to come out to my house with me." I said, "Well, yeah, when?" He says, "Now." I said, "Well, we've got another show, 2 more shows to do." He says, "Oh, don't worry about that, man." So we go out to his house. He had a large, like, living room, and he was one record short of having every single recording that Louis ever made. And Louis would stay at Monty's house. Oh yeah, that's the time that Lil was getting on me, man. So he says, "I'm going to tell you the story of Louis Armstrong," and he did it. He would play a record and talk about it, and it became almost impossible to play any one of Louis' songs, like "Strutting with Some Barbecue," without people say, "Man, that he's doing a real good imitation of Louis." And I'm not. Once you met Louis, man, he got into your bloodstream, into your brain, and yet he was a sweetheart of a person. He was never not a nice guy. He was a lovely human being, and uh, well, I just had a couple of nice experiences with him. And anyway, thanks for letting me have a chance to talk about Lou a little bit.
Absolutely.
I'd love to tell you that one story.
Well, I tell you what, hang tight, hang tight. Don't you go anywhere, Ricky. Don't go anywhere. I am
No.
gonna say an official sign off. We're gonna stop being live here in a second. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Stay healthy. Hopefully, we'll see everybody on the other side of this pandemic, and look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night back here 8 o'clock Eastern with Peter Pickett and Eric Marine. So for now, Larry Powell, Studio HFL, signing off. Have a good night.